As you can see, the meeting is being recorded. You will be muted and your camera will be off when you enter the room, just so my poor little brain doesn't get completely overwhelmed. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat and we'll get started in a second. Do I just need to pin myself? Am I spotlighted? Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. For those of you that have not been to one of these before, my name is Jo Southall. I'm an independent occupational therapist. I also live with hypermobile EDS, POTS, and a selection of other miscellaneous health problems. I'm here this evening to basically answer any and all questions that you guys can think of that you would like more information on, even if it's just like a vague idea. Don't feel like you have to formulate questions with actual purpose. I'm fluent in brain fog, so just stick whatever you're thinking in the chat and I will work my way through. As I said, this meeting is being recorded, so if you would like to change your username, please feel free to do that to something else, and just to make sure you're completely invisible. But yes, other than that, I will dive in with some questions. I've got 3 pre-asked questions and then I'll be doing all of the live ones. So please feel free to start typing your questions up and I'm going to dive right in. So I'll just read these out first so that we all know what we're talking about. So the first one is, please can I ask, my children aged 3 and 11 are both hypermobile and have autism and ADHD. We have an indoor trampoline which they use frequently, especially when they're stimming. Not only do they bounce on the trampoline, they will also spin on the rail of the trampoline. Is this okay? They also have a large trampoline in the back garden, which they use when the weather is nice, as they are home educated, often go to trampoline parks frequently as well. I've been told on parents' forums that I shouldn't let them use trampolines as it's bad for their hips. I've been told to purchase a very expensive indoor trampoline, which has a much lighter suspension. Is this okay to use for people who have osteoarthritis? But our 3-year-old's physio has told me that it's actually okay for her to use the trampoline. Actually, she recommends it as the jumping and bouncing will strengthen her muscles. My kids really don't want to lose their trampolines, but I don't want to cause them long-term harm. So I'm very confused about what to do. What would you recommend? So I will start this by saying that I absolutely love trampolining. I don't do it very often anymore, but I used to do it an awful lot as a kid and a teen and in my early 20s. Trampolining, much like any and other, all of the sports, I don't ever have a hard and fast rule that bendy people shouldn't do X, Y, Z. What I tend to stick with is look at this person as an individual. Is this person's muscle tone and joint stability good enough to do this activity safely? I know people with hypermobility who are professional dancers, gymnasts, acrobats, all kinds of other stuff. Those people might be very well safe on a trampoline. Likewise, I know people who are full-time wheelchair users who are injured by sneezing or looking in the wrong direction. And those people may not be safe trampolining for a long time. It is, I think, a problem where anyone sets a hard and fast rule for any group of people, because we are all individuals at the end of the day. So with all sport, with all forms of exercise, I would recommend taking regular short breaks. And the reason for that is that bendy people have a tendency to not notice injuries when we're doing the thing that causes the injury. What tends to happen is we feel fine at the time, and then we'll stop. And then a short period of time later, whatever kind of payback we've got to pay for doing that ridiculous level of activity will kick in at a later date, and then we'll feel terrible. So if you take regular breaks, it gives you a better opportunity to stop, assess how your body is feeling, notice any injuries, notice if you're feeling fatigued or tachycardic or just tired, any kind of like tweaks and twinges that are going on. The more often you stop and the more opportunities you give yourself to kind of reassess, think of it like a little MOT for your body, the more likely you are to be able to stop before you do major damage. With any activity, if you're looking to add in trampolining or to level up your skills, improvement should be done gradually and over time. So learning to take breaks is really important. Equally, not pushing yourself on a bad day, or if you feel like you've only just got the hang of the skill, don't feel the need to learn the next thing immediately, is a good idea. Slow and steady really does win the race with conditions like these. So generally speaking, I think trampolining, as long as you're taking adequate precautions to minimize injury, can be a very sensible thing to do. It's excellent for proprioception. It's excellent for balance. It's a really good full body exercise. Being able to control your body shape in the air and make sure you're landing on the spot you're aiming for. All of that is a really brilliant full body exercise. And from a sensory perspective, obviously they're getting vast amounts of joy from it. So it does sound like this is a brilliant activity. What you might like to have a think about are just doing some videos. So one of the issues with a fast-paced sport like trampolining, because you're literally just seeing things at the speed of gravity, is that you don't necessarily spot what I've started calling micro traumas. So micro traumas are where you're getting like little tweaks and twinges and little kind of wobbles, particularly around like the ankle area. And it's very hard to see those, to spot those at full speed video. So I actually did this for myself when I was doing parkour and free running, like way back when. I videoed myself doing what I thought was a very good standard of quality, healthy, stable exercise, played it back in slow motion, and was able to spot the exact reasons why the day after training my ankles always felt horrible. And it was because when I slowed the video down, I could spot all of the times where I was twisting or turning or landing on the wrong part of my foot. So if you're ever not sure about whether an exercise is in a good position, you're using the right muscle groups, all that kind of stuff, video it, slow it down, have a look almost frame by frame, and just check that you're not getting any really awkward looking positioning or twisted ankles or anything like that. If you're not seeing any of those signs, if they're not getting any kind of intense pain immediately after exercise or the following day, honestly, go right ahead. It's probably brilliant exercise. If they do start having any kind of pain or problems from it, go back to physio, build some strength, come back to trampolining after you've done a little bit of rehab. You could also look at things like, as an example, if either of them are carrying an injury, things like compression bandages or kinesiology tape can be really useful for just managing that during the rehab stage to prevent re-injury. But other than that, trampolining sounds like it's a brilliant sport for them, and I'm very glad they've all found something fun to sort of enjoy that with. I'm just double checking I haven't missed anything out in that. Oh, swinging on the bars and things. I used to do that too. As a kid, in fact, if I had a trampoline, I'd probably still do it now. Just be careful about complete like dead hang motions where you just, if you're completely sort of arms locked out, relaxed, hanging down, it can be quite a high strain on the shoulder. Whereas if you're swinging, but you're maintaining a little bit of tension in your upper body, it should be fine. Just again, be careful of like sort of trampolines tipping and that kind of thing as well. But if it's done sensibly and it's done safely, I would also recommend maybe having mats either side just in case, because often getting on and off the trampoline, particularly if you're accidentally falling off the trampoline, tends to be the bit where injuries occur. So yeah, just a little bit of protection around there. Otherwise, be sensible with it, but have fun. Okie dokie. Okay, two questions again. My question is about Morton's neuroma between the second and third digit, as is this a common occurrence for people with EDS and arthritis? Any tips to ease it, and will it go away, or is it a case of keeping it from inflaming or getting more aggravated? I'm presently using 2 sticks to mobilize as my other hip subluxes also. I've also fashioned a pad to lace behind the metatarsal head in the hope that pressure will be relieved. It has helped. Is it best to keep on with this, or may I eventually be able to throw my second stick aside and dispense with a foot pad? I'm a yoga teacher and a lifelong lover of postural balance, so have a good awareness of my feet and arch support through balanced foot practices and sensitive anti-rheumatic exercises. Any more advice or super tips, Magic Joe? Love that. So my only other tip would be actually to get yourself referred to podiatry. So Um, I'm not aware of this being a more common problem for hypermobile people. That said, there's going to be a big overlap simply because Morton's neuroma is a fairly common thing in the whole population. And there's going to be some overlap because being bendy doesn't protect you from getting it. So um, I'm always wary of saying there's a cause and effect relationship with things just because there is a correlation. And I suspect this might be one of those things where there is a kind of correlation there, but I don't know that it's a cause and effect issue. So referral to podiatry would be sensible. What they might be able to do is basically make you some insoles that specifically offload pressure in the really inflamed areas, which would hopefully mean that you would be slightly more mobile and less dependent on the sticks. You can also maybe consider wearing those insoles inside socks so that when you're not in shoes, you're still getting the same level of support. That might be particularly useful for things like yoga, because a lot of people I know don't like doing like yoga and Pilates and stuff in trainers or that kind of thing. Whereas orthotic inserts in a sock feels a little bit like barefoot exercise, and that's a lot more manageable. But yeah, I think a podiatry referral would be sensible. You may also benefit short term from a course of anti-inflammatories, but that would be a decision you make with your GP. So if you haven't spoken to them yet, I would give them a chat, and hopefully they can refer you to orthotics as well. But yeah, I don't think it's a bendy problem specifically. I think you just got unlucky in the lottery there and ended up with two separate issues at the same time. So I would see how it goes. Regarding the hip issue, you may find that compression shorts are really helpful for hip subluxation. So a really good pair of Spanx would probably be like a helpful kind of hip support. There are compression hip braces that you can buy, but genuinely, shapewear would do a similar job. Shapewear plus kinesiology tape would be brilliant. And then the other one would be some kind of basically like compression orthotics. So things like DM orthotics, like lycra suit garments, that kind of thing, would potentially be a good idea. But yeah, podiatry would be a good place to start for all of that. And then another question: is it common to have what doctor diagnosed as a ganglion on the foot of an ankle that protrudes, especially on inversion of the foot? Can it be anything else, like a misplaced talus or other tarsal? I wondered if it was caused by lax ligaments, very flexible feet, and damage from a previous sprain. Can they go away also, or is it for life? Any support required for preventing it worsening? That, again, I would take to podiatry, actually, and just see what they have to say. I think it's unlikely to be a misplaced bone. Typically, if you've got bones wandering off here and there, it's a very particular kind of sharp, stabby, don't weight bear on me kind of pain. And if you were to present with that kind of pain and that loss of range of motion, I would have imagined there would be x-rays done, and that would have definitely picked up a displacement. It's not impossible, and I can't see your feet, and I'm not qualified to diagnose visually anyway. So yeah, I definitely think it sounds like podiatry would be sensible. Maybe a good set of insoles. They might also be able to recommend some exercises to just ensure that you are staying really well, kind of within your safe range of motion and getting a really good kind of balance of rehab exercises post sprain. Ankle sprains can take a frankly ridiculous amount of time to get better. And I think as healthcare professionals, we often undersell how bad a sprain can be. So I would not be surprised if there were complications from that were ongoing months or even years later, but definitely podiatry would be the way to go. So yeah, I hope that is a good sort of starting point there. Okay. Yeah, I think that covers that one. Have we had any questions through on the chat? Let me just have a little check. We just have somebody Oh yeah, lovely. Oh, that's a good point. Okay, so I've been prompted to chat about exam season approaching. Yeah, which actually, particularly for sort of kids and teens this time of year, can be quite a stressful time. There are a couple of things that it might be worth having a think about in relation to exams specifically. And the first one comes down to the sheer volume of writing that has to happen. So one of the things I often talk about is pacing, but pacing specifically relating to things like writing could include very, very simple things to actually just keep your hands a bit more mobile and to minimize hand pain, particularly if you've got a really packed deadline and you've got multiple exams in a day, particularly if those exams are the longer written questions rather than the nice short, sharp kind of things. Very, very simple things, like, as an example, at the end of every paragraph or the end of every question, stop and put down your pen, even if it's just for the amount of time that it takes you to read the next question. Just have a little bit of a fidget and a stretch. And what that's going to start doing is getting you out of the habit of being in this very, very tight fixed position for an extended period of time. So we've probably all done it at some point where you stayed in one shape for too long, and then you try and get out of that shape and realize that you've seized up so horribly you can't function anymore. So putting your pen down very simply at the end of every question is a really sensible thing to do. If you are prone to hyperextension of your fingertips, like this here, you may find that writing puts an awful lot of pressure on those ligaments, and you can end up with a lot of finger and hand pain as a result. If that is the case, ring splints might be a really useful strategy for you. So let me just grab a few here. So ring splints, what we're talking about, these are the plastic overlay ones, which you sometimes get prescribed through hand therapy on the NHS. What the aim for all of these things is basically just to minimize hyperextension and to block your finger joints from going backwards. Since fingers aren't supposed to go backwards at all, any amount of backwards is a problem. So mostly this is noticed with handwriting, but you may also notice it with things like light switches or plug sockets, typing, push button toilet flushes are another one where a lot of people get injured. So what these do is they basically slot onto the joint where there's a problem. That's really hard to see, isn't it? There we go. And it blocks your finger's ability to bend backwards. So this is a similar thing, but in silver. Ooh. So again, blocking that kind of backwards motion there. But you can still make a fist. You still got your fingers going all directions they're supposed to go in. So when you start applying these things to handwriting, as an example, rather than having a pen grip that looks a little bit like that, which might be familiar for a few of you, you end up with a pen grip that looks like this, which is pretty close to what it's supposed to look like. Now, the benefit of this is that it means that you're not constantly hyperextending your fingertips. Now, with any kind of splinting, what we would typically say is that you shouldn't be splinting things all of the time. So the more often you wear a splint, the less of the work your body actually has to do on its own. Ring splints are almost sort of an exception to that, a little bit, for two reasons. The first one is that it's not supporting me in any way doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing. All it does is block the things I'm not supposed to be doing. And the second reason is that there's an awful lot of different joints in your hands, fingers, and wrists, and a very limited amount of muscle that can support that. So unless you're planning on putting as much time into finger training as your average professional rock climber, realistically, it's quite difficult to build enough strength to actually stabilize all of those joints if you are severely hypermobile. So ring splints are something that actually, from a writing perspective, I do recommend quite often, certainly much more often than your other splinting options. The next option is adaptive pens. So this is the pen again. It looks a little bit like a rocket ship, and it's a triangle shape when you view it from the sort of tip side that way. So rather than when you write normally, all of your pressure coming through your fingertips. With this one, you're slotting your index finger into the top and you're folding your fingers around it like that. And what this means is that when you're writing, the downward force for writing comes from the middle of this bone rather than from this joint. Now, that can be really, really helpful in terms of stabilizing those joints and reducing pain. The thing I love about the pen again is that because it's so small, it works for most hand sizes too. Whereas a lot of the other kind of adaptive pens on the market are very much designed for full-grown adults with osteoarthritis or something. This is something that does work quite well for your average kids and teens. So pen again is something that I do recommend quite often. The only issue with it, if I can get the top off, oh no, I don't think I can, it's stuck, is that because it's such a short pen, the actual ink on the inside doesn't last very long. So if you're doing like an awful lot of writing with it, I would recommend buying one that you can refill and stocking up on ink refills to keep in your pencil case. But yeah, the pen again is a nice thing to try. For anyone with, significant physical impairment because of their hypermobility, exam conditions, very much the same as legal, workplace adaptations, are covered by the Equality Act. So, asking for things like extra time, you are not at all being unreasonable to help your kids get their exams done in a way that isn't going to cause them as much pain or as much fatigue. Some of the other sort of adjustments you might like to ask for would be things like having extra time for breaks, specifically that allow your kids to get up, fidget, lay down, have a bit of a stretch, get rehydrated, particularly if POTS is a bit of an issue for them, or any kind of gastrointestinal problems are an issue. But all of these things are quite reasonable things to ask for. So it might be worth having a conversation with the kids' school in the run up to exam season, just about some of the things that you might be able to put in place to hopefully make the whole process a little bit smoother. Anything else I can add there? Yeah, I think that's my top tips there. But if anyone has follow-up questions, do stick them in the chat. There we go, lovely. Oh, Nick, thank you for your message. That's great. Chat is working then. Love the idea of insoles inside socks. Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm such a barefoot person that I really, really hated when I had custom insoles and ankle braces. I always wanted ankle braces that I could wear without shoes because I hate having to wear shoes in the house. And particularly if I'm in like rest mode, having to wear shoes and then get on the sofa and then take the shoes off and then put them back on again. No. So insoles in socks is a good idea. You can also get some little gadgets. They're basically built-in arch support, kind of sewn into tubey grip slices. And what they do is basically provide arch support, but without shoes. So if you've got particularly flat feet and you find that causes you pain, that kind of thing can actually be really useful. A podiatrist should be able to help with all of these. Likewise, if you don't have podiatry in your area or you are unable to access a podiatrist, then orthotics, the department, should be able to help too. Podiatry sometimes make orthotics for your shoes, which is a little bit confusing. And an orthotist will sometimes do orthotics for shoes too. So there's a little bit of an overlap there. The difference tends to be is that, podiatry will be foot and ankle specialists. That's really their whole thing. And what they'll look at is your alignment, your function, so that they're getting your whole body stood like straight and symmetrically and balanced really, really well, based off how your feet and ankles behave. And it can be really amazing the difference that it makes just adjusting one foot ever so slightly in terms of your body symmetry, your function, your positioning, your pain management, and all that kind of thing. One of the challenges with this is that it is often quite a big adjustment in terms of your muscle function. And what tends to happen when you give somebody new orthotics, particularly if they are a significant change from their kind of starting point posture-wise, is that it's completely exhausting whenever you use them. and you get a lot of residual pain after using them. And the reason for that is that your body simply isn't used to working properly. So when you put it in the right position for the first time in, say, a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, it takes some time to build all that muscle back up and to train your body how it's supposed to be doing these things. So whenever you get new orthotics or splints or supports or any kind of shoe insert, anything like that, it's really, really important to make that adjustment slowly. Don't just pick the things up, put them in, and then walk around for 8 hours. Generally speaking, 1 hour inside your own home, just pottering around doing odd jobs, is plenty for the first week. Gradually build yourself up to wearing them for 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day inside the home, and then maybe drop it down to 1 or 2 hours, but outside the home, and then build yourself back up until you can wear them comfortably most of the time. You may also find that having a combination approach, so undertaking some physiotherapy at the same time, is a really useful way for you to build that muscle effectively as well. Orthotics as a department is also available via the NHS, so you can get your GP, or I think any consultant and even some senior physiotherapists can refer you to orthotics. And orthotics on the NHS will look at everything from wrist braces, knee braces, back braces, to compression garments, to custom built shoes, to all kinds of other stuff. In some areas of the UK, orthotics is, as a department, kind of rolled in with prosthetics as well. But in other areas of the UK, they're quite like distinct and separate. So it's worth just clarifying, double checking you're going to the right place when you get your referral through. So orthotics can fit, measure, and make or provide a really wide range of splints and braces on the NHS. And that is a particularly good thing because the good quality splints and braces cost, in some cases, almost literally an arm and a leg. The last pair of knee braces I got on the NHS, if I'd bought them myself, retail at £650 per brace. And I needed one for each knee. And that's completely outside my budget by a significant margin. But my NHS orthotist didn't really bat an eyelid. So it's definitely, if you do use splints and braces a lot, or you think you would benefit from that, worth getting a referral. If you get the referral through, you get your splints and braces sorted, and they don't end up being everything that you'd hoped, or they don't work for you, or they don't fit well, your orthotist can replace them, and there's kind of no cost to you. Whereas if you had bought your own splints and braces and they end up not being fit for purpose, you're still kind of, you're out financially, basically, as well as it being inconvenient. So I definitely think that's a worthwhile thing to do. Let me just have a look. Still no questions. Everybody's quiet this evening. Okay. What else can we have a chat about? So the other thing to think about this time of year, not so much right now because it's freezing here, but the weather is gradually changing from winter mode to summer mode. When I work with people long term, one of the things I often talk about with them is the fact that our coping strategies are often seasonal. So we will sometimes have strategies that work particularly well for hot weather and different strategies that work for cold weather. As an example, from a POTS perspective, from a autonomic dysfunction kind of perspective, a lot of us find that our circulation is absolutely rubbish in our extremities. Having cold hands in the summer, mildly inconvenient. Having cold hands in the dead of winter, potentially dangerous. So you can start to get things like chilblains, you can start to get like numbness in your hands, which opens you up to a whole range of injuries that you don't necessarily notice. But yeah, chilblains have been a big issue for a lot of people as well. So in the winter, a lot of my coping strategies, even my clothing choices, are geared towards kind of retaining heat and maintaining my body temperature at much higher than the ambient room temperature. So I'll wear a lot of like wool thermals, I'll wear gloves, I'll wear like kind of fingerless mitten type things. I might have my hair down more often than up. I will, layer socks and ankle braces in different orders, all that kind of stuff. Whereas in summer, a big old chunk of my self-management goes towards avoiding overheating. And that means that I literally have a summer wardrobe and a winter wardrobe, and I swap out the majority of my clothes. So this time of year, I'll gradually start swapping out items from my really chunky wool jumpers through to lighter weight linen dresses, things that are breathable and airy. It can be quite difficult, and we often find ourselves getting caught out at times like this because you have one half of the day where you are in winter coping strategy mode and one half of the day where you're in summer coping strategy mode. So I think it can be useful to just sit and refamiliarize yourself with the sorts of challenges you've faced in past years, particularly with relation to seasonal changes, but also with relation to the tasks that we maybe start doing. So, this time of the year, if you're a gardener, it's time to start doing some of the actual hard work. It's time to start, weeding, tidying up, all that kind of stuff. If you haven't been in your garden, particularly for a couple of months, the first time you attempt a big old stint of gardening, you're probably going to feel not so great the day after. So having a think about how we're changing our routines and how we can pace the new routines and gradually making that transition rather than going from one day where we're in full on winter mode to the next day pretending that it's August. It's about that gradual transition and supporting our bodies to make those gradual adjustments rather than expecting that we can get away with a big change in routine or a big change in diet or exercise levels. Because generally speaking, big changes don't tend to go so well for people with horribly unreliable bodies. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. And I think for people that have got so many kind of potential triggers and complicating factors like weather, like barometric pressure, this time of year can be a real challenge, but it's a good time right now to sit down and think, what's coming up? How am I going to cope with hot weather? Do my medications make me more sensitive to the sun? Do I need to buy a couple of extra hats, kind of thing, for this year? Are you ready for the first heat wave so that you're not caught out having to force yourself to go shopping 2 days into the hottest weather we've had for months because you run out of sun cream? Do you know, that kind of thing? So hopefully that's sort of helpful advice, is worth having a think about. Okie dokie. A question. Fabulous. What is the relationship between hip subluxation and a hip sprain? My physio has modified his diagnosis from hip subluxation to hip sprain without having seen me again since the first and only session. Can this be a lesser and or greater issue, as in a sprain compared to a subluxation? Okay, so I will start by explaining what those words actually mean for anyone who isn't familiar, but also because it starts to explain the differences because of it. So a subluxation is, imagine this is the top of your femur, and this is the side of your pelvis where your hip attaches. A subluxation is where you partially displace that joint and then it goes back in again. A dislocation is a total displacement of that joint and then it going back in again. So what happens when you subluxate or dislocate a joint is that you sprain it more often than not. And a sprain is very simply damage to the ligaments through some form of injury. And that can be an overstretching injury. It can be a falling over injury. It can be a rolling your ankle type injury. It can be bad luck because existing as a hypermobile person is inherently dangerous kind of injuries. But basically a sprain is ligament damage. So what has probably happened is that you could very well have had a subluxation and it's been reduced and that issue is resolved, as in the sense that your hip is now back where it belongs. But that doesn't mean you kind of got away with that without consequence. And the consequence often of a subluxation is a sprain. So it may just be that that's a way of explaining kind of the injury recovery process. It may be that it wasn't a subluxation in the first place. And either way, the treatment approach is basically the same thing. And the treatment approach is, let's manage the pain and the inflammation to start with. And that involves painkillers, anti-inflammatories, ice packs, mobility aids, avoiding doing whatever it was that caused you this injury in the first place, all of that stuff. But it may also be about mitigating the chances of it happening again. So, as an example, if you sustained a hip injury walking, let's now look at mobility aids and splints and braces that protect you from that in the future. The next stage of that is after the acute injury has calmed down and hopefully your inflammation and pain levels have restored themselves a little bit, is to then look at rehabilitation. So if you have sustained some soft tissue damage and you have prevented yourself from re-injuring and everything's back where it belongs, you now need to build that muscle strength up to, at the very least, where it was prior to the injury. Ideally, we'd be looking at getting you fitter so that that injury doesn't recur. So it's kind of like the next step process is then looking at exercises. It's looking at your walking style, your posture, your sitting style, what activities you're undertaking, all that kind of stuff. And the hope would be that if you can build enough muscle strength, you can more accurately and adequately compensate for the fact that your ligaments are made of chewing gum and determination rather than actual functional collagen. So it's a complicated thing. The difficulty for hypermobile people is that often we will partially displace a joint and it will instinctively snap back to where it belongs the minute you kind of go, oh, and it's that kind of tensing motion will snap it back. So by the time you get yourself down to A&E 4 hours later, 6 hours later, they finally get an X-ray done. There's nothing to see because the injury, the subluxation, has already been resolved. And whether it resolved itself or whether you forced it back in joint, kind of irrelevant. The residual damage is soft tissue ligament damage, which doesn't show on an X-ray anyway. So often, if you have had a subluxation, you've solved that immediate problem yourself. And then by the time you get to see a healthcare professional, your X-ray is normal. What they'll do is just write down sprain, tick box, anti-inflammatory prescription, use crutches for 2 weeks, see a physiotherapy after, professional afterwards. And that's how it tends to go. The only way to accurately, formally diagnose a subluxation is either for a physiotherapist to literally have a hand on the part of the body when it happens, which generally is because they've asked you to do something in an assessment that is, in some way triggering or problematic for your body, or for you to completely freeze in place the minute it happens and for somebody to bring you to an X-ray machine without moving that body part again. So the vast majority of hypermobile people's subluxations either have no proof whatsoever or go completely underdiagnosed because there's nothing to see by the time you finally get to A&E. If this is a recurrent problem, regardless of whether it's a sprain or a subluxation, stick with the treatment program. And the treatment program is manage the pain, manage the inflammation, get yourself physically fit again, and then risk assess whatever task it was that caused this injury and see if there's a way you can modify that to protect your joints more effectively. And hopefully that kind of thing helps a little bit. Maybe let me know in the comments. But yeah, from a physio perspective, I think the other issue is that physiotherapy as a profession is very, very evidence-based. They like large cohort studies of peer-reviewed data, tick boxes, scan results, all that kind of stuff. So without having physically seen or touched or handled a thing, it may well be that they're experiencing some internal kind of institutional pressure to put that down as a sprain rather than a subluxation because there is no proof it was a subluxation. But that would just be a guess based on some somewhat sketchy workplace reporting from, what my colleagues have said about the industry as a whole. It's going to be different in everywhere. So it's who knows, but hopefully this helps. Yeah. Thanks, Magic Joe. I'm really liking this Magic Joe thing. If that could catch on, that would be super great. I've been given poor guidance so far. You are the guide, so much more experience than the people I'm seeing. So-called care. Yeah, I think it is very, very difficult. Yes, Magic Joe has fully gone to my head. Yeah, I think one of the difficulties for healthcare professionals, I mean, obviously, like I've kind of got a cheat code here in that I've got all of these patient experiences built into my training. I was bendy long before I was an occupational therapist. So this was my second career based on the fact that my hypermobility stopped me from doing my first career. But yeah, I think it's very difficult for your average, very physically fit, healthy, relatively pain-free individual to imagine what it's like to have a body that you cannot trust to do its job from 1 minute to the next. The other issue is that hypermobile people, generally speaking, more so than any other patient group I work with, instinctively compensate for things to a really impressive degree. So a lot of us will manage to look more functional, will look fitter, will look more stable, will look better able to undertake a task than we actually are. And we don't even realize we're doing this, but we'll use entirely the wrong muscle groups to accomplish a task. So really random things like I must have been about 20, 19, or maybe even 21 or 22. Either way, like over 10 years ago now, but it was only in hospital, like sort of a long time ago now, that I learned you're supposed to use your butt muscles when you walk. I've been walking my entire like childhood and adult life using entirely the wrong muscle groups. And I spent probably the best part of 6 months with a physiotherapist on and off, learning how to like actually turn on the right muscles that I'm supposed to be using for things. Now, the entire time I'd been doing this wrong, I'd also been a gymnast, a dancer, a very high level rock climber. You know, I was really physically fit, but I still wasn't even getting the hang of walking using the right muscle groups. So that compensatory approach we all take completely unconsciously makes it look like we're much more functional than we actually are. So when you finally get a physiotherapist to actually do a hands-on assessment, often they'll be really like shocked by the fact that your certain muscle groups will be in such poor condition and you'll be so deconditioned in key areas. And yet when they get you to walk across a floor from one side or the other, it looks like you're doing okay. And it's only when you get that understanding of the fact that bendy people are basically cheating at life the entire time, that's when you can start putting all those pieces together, and it makes an awful lot more sense as to why we get injured doing things like putting on a cardigan, but often are fine going to the gym. So, yeah, it's a weird one, but I find us fascinating. So there we go. Can I ask if Nordic walking is good for us? Is there anything we need to bear in mind? And do you know of any resources in this area for us bendies? That's a fantastic question. So Nordic walking, if anyone hasn't seen this before, do look it up, because I think it's a really, really interesting approach to things. And it has the potential to be a really good form of exercise for a lot of people. Nordic walking has some major benefits over regular just going for a walk. And the first one is that the poles you use for Nordic walking provide 2 extra points of contact with the ground. And those 2 extra points of contact with the ground give you a massive amount of extra information that could be a real boost for those of us with terrible proprioception. So proprioception is your ability to work out where you are in relation to your environment and the rest of your body. So proprioception is the sense in our body that allows us to walk safely through door frames without bouncing off the sides. Now, one of the difficulties in proprioception with walking without any kind of mobility aid or assistive device is that when you take 1 foot off the ground for every step, you've got 1 point of contact with the ground, and that does not tell you much about your environment. Nordic walking, where you've got a minimum of 2 points of contact with the ground, essentially doubles your information about your environment. So from a sensory perspective, it can make it much, much easier to do things like walk over uneven surfaces, because you are getting so much more context for where your body is. And you may find yourself better at going on uneven ground, less likely to trip, more confident in terms of walking, but also holding a conversation at the same time. So that's a really, really nice kind of way to think about doing it. And I would actually recommend that being a really cool thing to have a look into. In terms of bearing things in mind, very much like the whole trampolining approach, don't dive headfirst into like 15, 20-mile hikes. Think very carefully about what your current level of fitness is and what you're working towards, and gradually try to improve things over weeks, months, or even years. So it may be that to start with, you've practiced just on your own, maybe with a guide or with a coach, just very, very short walks, but quite regularly. And then you can build up to doing bigger, more extended trips with bigger groups of people. If you can find a local group and anyone there has experience working with people who have musculoskeletal problems, that would be ideal. I'm not aware of any particular resources with bendy people in mind, but there may be some disability related stuff which would potentially find you links to people who just have a bit of experience having somebody whose body doesn't work 100% as standard. But yeah, I think that would be a good thing to look into. The only other thing that I would consider would be your footwear and the poles that you're using. Think very carefully about what points of contact you have around your thumbs and your palms, and go for something really ergonomic and supportive that isn't going to strain your thumbs too badly when you're using them. And in terms of shoes, if you have particularly rubbish ankles, maybe think about a higher level supportive shoe, just to give you a little bit of bonus ankle support, particularly for uneven ground. But other than that, I think just very, very slow and steady, take your time, build up gradually, and have a lovely time. Okie dokie. Hi, Joe. I used to be an OT too. Fabulous. Nice to meet you. Always good to have bendy OTs out there. I've got a frozen shoulder due to too much knitting during COVID. Oh my goodness, I can so relate. Sitting in a chair, which is bad for the shoulder. I've stopped knitting. The pain has lessened, but my range of motion is still restricted. Do you have any suggestions, please? I'm seeing a physio next week. Great to join you on here. Thank you for joining me on here. So one of the things I would have a think about would be if there's anything other than knitting that's also an aggravating point. So often it's not necessarily the activity that's the problem, but the amount of the activity we've done. So if knitting sat in that chair has been a problem, are you replicating that position at other times of the day? Are you sat in a chair driving, or are you doing crosswords, or is the dining table at the same angle? All those kinds of things, because it may be that although knitting was the triggering incident, there are still other things that are occurring that is aggravating that situation. Physio is definitely a good suggestion. If you're working with a physiotherapist who is not experienced with hypermobile people, whatever they recommend, I would start with a third of. So a third of the reps, a third of the frequency, a third of the weight, a third of the resistance, all that kind of stuff. Just because one of the biggest mistakes physios make with hypermobile people is thinking that we're fitter than we actually are. So they'll tend to give out too much of things and underestimate how deconditioned we can be, but still appear functional. So start really, really slowly with that and gradually build yourself up. If you have a negative response to anything, do not be afraid to go back and say, I can't do it, it causes pain, or is it supposed to feel like that, or can we do this in a different way? The pressure is on your physio to figure out a routine that works for you. It's not on you to force yourself to do a routine that does not work for your body. In terms of range of motion, thinking about very, very gently, just trying to move into those areas that are still tight or restricted would be potentially a sensible thing to try. I would do it when you are very relaxed, very warm, and as an example, if I've seized up really badly in any of my joints and I need to get them going again, I'll do it in the bath, like a hot bath, because it really helps me to get rid of that stress and that tension that prevents me from going any further. So if you can safely get yourself in and out of the bath or shower, just doing a little bit of very gentle movements and stretching inside the bath or shower might be a sensible way to get yourself going a little bit. Heat packs can be really useful for that if getting in and out of the bath and shower is not safe or is just massively inconvenient. And the other thing it might be worth trying would be a TENS machine. So TENS, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, for anyone who's not come across that. So this is my TENS machine. Very simply, just a set of cables, a little electric box, and a couple of sticky electrodes. And you stick the sticky electrodes either side of the thing that hurts, and then it gives you teeny tiny electric shocks. And it works on the kind of pain gate theory, where basically your body can only process a limited amount of sensory information at any one time. And if you are giving it sensory information with a really high priority, so in this case, a nice tingly electric sensation, it can basically kind of take up all the bandwidth that would have been required for that like dull, throbbing, low priority pain sensation. So that's why TENS works so well. It's particularly used for labor pain, but I actually use it for hip and back pain, shoulder pain. I've used it for like dental pain, like on my face following an abscess. TENS is one of my favorite pain management strategies. And it's a really, really nice one if you've got that kind of like grindy, achy, makes you want to remove your own arm kind of pain that's just super disruptive all day. So I definitely recommend getting a TENS machine and seeing how you get on with that in terms of pain management. And then hopefully the physio approach can get you going properly. Lovely. How did I manage to be a high-level rock climber? I climb casually on physio recommendation, but it always absolutely wipes me out. Well, it absolutely wiped me out. I was a lot physically fitter. I was also probably 3 or 4 stone lighter, and I didn't have POTS at the time. I have always found that non-repetitive activity is easier for me than repetitive activity. So when we went on like rock climbing trips, the hardest bit for me was getting from the car to the rock face. And I would have to do that on crutches, and everyone else would carry my kit for me because I could not do it. Not even like I couldn't even carry the weight of my own lunch. Just everyone else had rucksacks, and I would just do that bit on crutches. But the actual climbing bit I found so much easier. And I think it's partly because a lot of my bendy problems at the time were lower body and proprioceptive, and having more points of contact was actually better for me. But yes, it was a challenge. I was injured very, very regularly. I have had a couple of really quite serious injuries and illnesses since then. And I just never, I don't think I'll ever fully recover from the last couple. So I don't think I'll be climbing, consistently at any point in my life from now on. I might give it a go. Sometimes I've kept my climbing shoes. I've still got all the ropes and stuff in the garage because I can't bear to part with them. But yeah, it was a challenge for sure. That said, I do genuinely think casual climbing, as long as you have relatively stable wrists and shoulders, casual climbing is actually really brilliant exercise because it uses such a wide range of muscle groups that 10 minutes of climbing is so much more effective than 10 minutes of, say, walking, that you're getting much more kind of benefit for the amount of energy you're using. And the only other thing that really does the same extent is like water-based exercise, so swimming, that kind of thing. Both of those activities, every single bit of it uses almost your entire body. So it's a really, really efficient use of what energy you have got. And I hope that kind of makes a bit of sense. But yeah, there's a warm, fuzzy space in my heart for climbing, and there probably always will be. But yeah, so many injuries. So many injuries. Lovely. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, actually, the only other thing I will talk about is that something I've started doing recently to basically manage things that wipe me out totally, and that's smart monitoring. So I'm doing mine with a Garmin watch, but you can do it with all kinds of watches. What you're looking for is something called heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is a measure of the difference in frequency between each of your heartbeats. So say you've got a resting heartbeat of 60 beats a minute. That does not mean one beat every second for 60 seconds. Some of them will be closer together, some will be further apart. Now, what we can do with heart rate variability is predict fatigue flares, because your heart rate variability should be relatively high. So you should have some kind of close together beats and some further apart beats. And what this does is show that your body very quickly adapts to stresses and changes in posture and changes in temperature and all kinds of other stuff. So if your heart rate is not adapting quickly and it's just kind of plodding along at exactly the same rate for everything, it shows that your body is perceiving everything you do as being stressful. So when I now get a heart rate variability that's really low, I deliberately put myself in rest mode. Even if I don't feel too bad, I will spend the day doing absolutely minimal amounts of moving, minimal amounts of cooking. I'll be very careful with my nutrition, very careful with my posture. And what that's meant is that I recover much quicker from bad days. Whereas before I started doing this, I suspect on the transition day, I pushed myself too hard and then crashed harder as a result. So now that I'm tracking heart rate variability, what I can start to do is when I see my heart rate variability trending down a bit, but it's not quite in the amber alert zone, is start to have a little bit of a rest day until it plateaus off again. And it's been a really useful way for me to kind of get ahead of those big crashes by noticing them like a day sooner. And you can do this with things like exercise as well, by looking at what happens to your heart rate variability with different activities that you're doing. So if you're having a really kind of strenuous activity and immediately afterwards your heart rate variability is like through the floor, it's too much. And you then need to look at, can you pace yourself more effectively? Can you go more often but for less intensity? Are you keeping track of your nutrition and your hydration and your posture and your kind of your pain management while you're doing that activity? Just, are there any ways that you can maximize how well your body recovers to try and avoid that kind of crash period afterwards? So yeah, heart rate variability is a really, really interesting thing to start looking at. An awful lot of different smartwatchy things will do this now. There's even an app called Visible that does this, and it's specifically aimed at like chronic fatigue and long COVID. But yeah, anything that measures heart rate variability in some way or another and gives you a you're on track or you're about to flare up or you've pushed your limits too hard type spectrum can be a really useful thing, particularly with regards to managing postural tachycardia type symptoms, and particularly if you're trying to introduce a new form of exercise or a new part of your lifetime routine, because it gives you the ability to track how well you're adapting to this new change. And if this new change has been a positive change, or if doing this thing is actually causing you more problems. So yeah, heart rate variability, do some research, have a little look around, see how you go. My watch, I think, is a Garmin one. I've always gone for Garmin just because they're designed for extreme sports. And I figure if a watch can handle diving and rock climbing, it can probably handle gardening and washing up. So, so far, I've not managed to completely destroy one. But yeah, I hope all of that is some way useful. We are now at the end of the session and I need to go and lay down and have a rest. But thank you all very much for joining me. If we have any last minute questions come through, what I will do is stick them on for the start of next time. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I hope it's been useful. Please do join me again next month. It's always the third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. For an hour. About every other week, I managed to wrangle myself a surprise guest. And these special guests will be advertised on social media in the run up to these, and it will also be on the hMSA website. So if my special guest is an area of interest that you are particularly keen on, please do send your questions in advance, because the sessions with special guests do tend to be quite fast paced and busy. But yeah, so tune in next month. If you've got any questions, let me know in the meantime. And thank you very much for joining me. Take care. Bye.